Welcome to a very special conversation with the world-renowned and international best-selling author Amin Maalouf. I'm Canan Atılgan. I'm the head of the Department Middle East and North Africa at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in Berlin, and I have today the great pleasure of interviewing Mr. Maalouf. So I think he does not really need much introduction. Let me, however, mention very briefly, he is a French writer from Lebanon. He is an Arab. He is a Christian. He is a European. He is a Mediterranean. And as diverse as his own identity are the books he writes. He writes novels, he writes essays, he writes historical nonfiction, and he writes also librettos for operas. His works have been translated into over 40 languages, and he himself has been awarded numerous prestigious awards, the latest of which was the National Order of Merit in France. And most importantly, he's not only a writer, he's an intellectual who takes clear positions on evolution of societies. And today we will be talking about where the world is heading to. And we want to focus also on a particular region, namely the Mediterranean and the developments there. So, Mr. Amin Maalouf, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting
me. Let me start with a general question on identity. Identity always stands in the center of your books, of your novels, of your essays. Why is this?
I think because I was born in Lebanon, which is a country, as you know, of many communities, the question of identity is present from the first moment in life and at every moment in life. And it is a problem that was never completely solved in my home country. They tried to solve it through a system, a political system, which today we know didn't work. And I think anybody who was born in that part of the world needs to reflect on that issue. And my attitude has been throughout my life spontaneously to say every person has to include all elements of his or her identity together, to put them together, to accept them, to acknowledge them, and to try to make something out of that mixture.
Over the last 20 years, you have published 3 essays in the name of identity, disordered world, and adrift. Reading them, one gets the impression that things are going from bad to worse, with fragmentation and tribalism in rise, and cooperation and solidarity in decline. Have you lost your hope, or do you see a way for reversing this trend?
I didn't lose hope, but for somebody who grew up in Lebanon, the impression I had when I was a very young boy was that we had a system which is very archaic, and we are apart from the world because the world has moved beyond this kind of problem. So what I discovered later on in life is that although we were archaic, the world was not going in the right direction, and the world is beginning to resemble the archaic system I knew in my youth. The issues of identity are not limited to a number of societies throughout the world. They are spreading, they are getting nastier, they are getting more complicated, and they are getting everywhere. So this does not lead me to despair, but I must say I'm extremely worried, and the essays you have mentioned are stem from these worries, in fact, mainly.
Also in your recent novel, with a very interesting title, Our Unexpected Brothers, you're telling the story of a humanity on the brink of a disaster. But then you bring the image of the ancient Greek as a potential savior of the world. So, what exact message you try to convey with this new novel?
It's a kind of philosophical tale, and it is partly optimistic and partly pessimistic. It is pessimistic in its description of the way the world is saved, because it's a kind of miracle. It's not a normal a normal process that we are using to save the world. As if I wanted to say, which is my feeling today, is that we really need some kind of a miracle to get out of the predicament where we are now. So the as optimistic part is that the world, after all, in that novel is saved, but my worries are still there. I think we have gone in the wrong direction for many years. I think mankind has all the possibilities, scientific, technological, economic, to solve all kinds of problems which we never had before. Never before our time, humanity had any possibility of solving its problem. Now it has the possibility. It doesn't have the will to solve them, because our mentalities have lagged behind the material and scientific and economic evolution.
Yes, the world may need a miracle, maybe a miracle from the Mediterranean. With this, I want to move towards this region, and I want to raise the issue of Mediterranean culture, which you have always portrayed as a culture of coexistence and tolerance. And I want to ask you, do you think this still is valid during our times where nationalism and populism are dominating our understanding, our self-understanding, and the understanding of others? And I want to add to it that in your novels, particularly the early ones, you have a very strong narrative of an inclusive Mediterranean identity. So, how can we get back there?
Well, unfortunately, the Mediterranean is not today an area of inclusion and an area where civilization meet and interact. It is a border area, it is a conflict area, and whatever I have written in the past, I unfortunately is less and less true. One could explain why we went in that direction, why the Levant has collapsed, why it was not possible to maintain this coexistence between communities of various origins and the interaction between them and the cultural flourishing of some of the cities in the Eastern Mediterranean. The reality is, as you said, that all this has been drowned by nationalism, by fanaticism, by the waves of history. And today the Mediterranean is a problem area. It's a problem for the rest of the world. I sometimes I imagine what would have happened if the world looking towards this part of the Mediterranean, the Levant, which is the birthplace of the great religions, what would have happened if there were there communities living together in peace, in harmony, interacting together, despite their differences in creed and faith? What kind of message would have been sent to the rest of the world? And what message is sent today? Because the world looks at this region, and the message is we cannot live together. We are warring tribes. We have to kill each other to have the space for us. And this has been so for a very, very long time.
Indeed, it seems like that the Mediterranean Sea have been reduced to a border between two totally different worlds. I'm saying this because you mentioned that the world looks at the region and says we can't live together. So how do you think, or what needs to be done to overcome this divide?
I'm not sure I know how. It's obvious that, for example, when we look at the Mediterranean, we see the north with the European community, developed countries, industrialized country, and we look at the south, immediately at the border, it's something different. One can ask why didn't development spread to the south? And I don't have an answer, but I think this could be asked in many parts of the world. Why is the border between the United States and Mexico a border between so different societies? So one has to say religion is not the problem, at least not the only problem. There are various problems. I think we should change the world in order to have development spread much more than it does to different parts of the world. Easier said than done, but I think we need to address this problem. Should the European community have included some other countries around? Probably at one time. Today, it is not in a position to include anybody. It's barely able to maintain its own cohesion. So I tend, in answering your question, I tend to say what we might dream of, but I'm not sure I could uh, I could tell you what are my what could be the solution. I don't see solution, to be honest.
You have repeatedly criticized Europe, the European countries, for not applying their values and their principles to their relations with other countries and nations. How do you assess the current European policies towards the southern neighborhood?
My criticism of uh, the attitude towards other parts of the world is more relevant for past times, much less for today. My criticism for today is something different. Uh, in the past eras, the era in which Europe had spread throughout the world, it's obvious that the standards that were supposed to be applied, the principles that were supposed to be applied to everybody, were not applied, neither in Africa or in Asia or anywhere. So I think that that is a moment in history uh, in which some opportunities, some important opportunities were lost. For example, I think that what France could have done in Algeria would have changed even the type of relationship between France and its immigrants. Something was lost forever, and it is true of many other countries. They lost opportunity. Today, Europe has changed, and it doesn't on the whole, it doesn't have the same attitude, although not in all parts of the world. My criticism today of what's happening in Europe is that I think Europe should have become more of United States of Europe. I mean, should have become a real country, a unified country to some extent, of course, with specific roles and specific weight for different nations. But Europe, as it is now, is not able to play a significant role in the world. I think its past is to some extent preventing it from playing a role. And I think the world needs today Europe with its experience of the relationship, with all the errors it committed, both in the relations between its own nations and in the relation with the rest of the world. And I think it could be a force for wisdom to avoid, for example, a confrontation which is coming between the United States and China. I think Europe is the force that should be the force of wisdom to prevent the confrontation in the coming decades. And unfortunately, again, I don't think it had given itself the means to play such a role.
And Europe is struggling, as you said, and Europe is struggling to stay relevant, not only in the world, but also in the direct neighborhood. So, but forward-looking policies needs always also a positive agenda. What positive agenda could Europe develop for the southern neighbors?
Well, I think there is always a lot to do. What I am stressing is that there should have been a strategic leap towards something different. Of course, Europe can play a role economically. Of course, it can play a role in expressing its commitment to human rights, and so there is, of course, an important role. But I I regret that it didn't give itself the possibility of having a real way in international relations, in rebuilding a world order. I think it should have been the main builder of a new, very balanced world order. So that's, but of course, many things can be done. Usually, in the last few years, the role of Europe was more of economic support for some countries, and moral support, which is good, but I'm not sure this is what the world needs today. The world needs direction, and Europe has not given itself the means of giving direction.
And talking about direction, I want to ask you also about a topic that has dominated the debates, particularly in Europe: migration. What is your take on this hot discussed topic?
Well, I am a migrant, and I strongly believe that people should be able to move from one country to another, and should be able to claim that they belong to more than one country, and be a bridge between their countries of origin and their countries of adoption. So this is my belief, and this is my life. However, I'm not sure we are going in that direction. What I observe is that for many reasons, the feelings toward immigration is getting sour in most part of Europe, even in the countries that were traditionally very open to relations and to greeting immigrants. And I have to admit that my feeling about the future is not very optimistic. I think in many countries, those who advocate a very tough line towards immigration are gaining ground. And politically, it seems unstoppable in the present atmosphere, political and intellectual atmosphere.
Yes, indeed. Migration is posing a challenge not only for Europe, but also for the countries in the south. And with this, I want to move with you towards a discussion about what's happening in the southern Mediterranean countries, because any cooperation, any coordination needs two partners, is never a one-way road. So what would you wish from the countries in North Africa, in the Levant, to come up with in order to strengthen the cooperation with Europe?
Well, you're absolutely right. The migration is not a phenomenon that begins in the country of arrival. It begins in the country of origin. People come because they feel that they have no future in their country of birth. They feel either persecuted or without any economic perspective, and this is extremely sad, and it's disruptive for the societies of origin. You know, often when people in an affluent society see people coming from elsewhere, they have the impression that they are the poorest, the most destitute, which is the opposite of the reality. Those who decide to move somewhere else are the more dynamic elements of the society. Those who are daring, those who have the energy of going, building a life somewhere else. So this is the most, the blood of those countries. Why they are leaving? Because I think their feeling is absolutely right. The systems that are governing the countries, most of the countries south of the Mediterranean, are systems that don't open roads for hope. People have no real democracy, no real freedom, no economic perspectives, and I think it's not just an impression they have. I think it must be the truth. And coming from there, I can tell you, I see today many people coming from my country of origin, Lebanon, and they're looking for work elsewhere, and I cannot blame them. I will never tell them, no, you should stay in your country of birth, because they are doing what is legitimate to do. If you don't feel you have a future in your own country, you have to move. It's your duty towards your family, towards yourself. You have to move. The duty of the leaders of the countries of origin, their duty is to give their people reason for hope, reason to stay, which unfortunately for most countries is not happening.
Well, the Middle East North Africa region is known as the world's most conflict-ridden region, with also many reasons for internal unrest. And with this, I want to move to a topic, namely the Arab uprising. So it was 10 years ago that protest erupted in various Arab countries, and now a decade has passed. How do you assess the developments in the last decade in the region?
Well, I would first tell you that I was enthusiastic when it happened. I was following every moment of the uprisings in Tunis, in Yemen, in Egypt, in so many countries. It was a marvelous moment to live in. And then, of course, came the disappointment. Uh, all the governing groups, communities, all the systems of government, each with its own methods, uh, coalesced in a way to make this movement collapse, and they succeeded. They succeeded remarkably, unfortunately. The movement collapsed. In some areas, there was a very strong repression. In some areas, it faded away. But what remains from that movement is a feeling of bitterness, because there was a huge hope, and the hope in few months was completely wiped out. Uh,
And
Please.
just a follow-up question on this. Since 2019, we've seen a new wave of protest in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Algeria, and elsewhere. So, what exactly is it that the people ask for and the government should deliver, from your point of view?
I think what the people ask for is what any people anywhere in the world ask for: dignity, freedom, work for the young, a good system of education, a good system of government, no corruption or little corruption, not too much, and all of that is not delivered, unfortunately. Of course, those movements are very different from each other. It's not like what happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was something resembling what happened in Europe in 1848. A movement that was spreading from one country to another, of course, with local differences, but there was a spirit that was spreading. You don't find it in the recent movements. They are local movements stemming from the realities of each country. In Iraq, it was a movement of protest against a situation that was felt to be unbearable. And in Sudan, it gave way to something palpable, because there were people who were wise enough to build something. And of course, the experiment is still going on, but I feel that the revolution achieved something. In Algeria, the movement were remarkable in a way, but at the same time, it was not able to conclude. There was this idea that if there were elections, the governing groups will transform them in something. Most probably, the people who were demonstrating didn't have the political structure that would allow them to to uh, to present a candidate and defend a party and reach power in a way. So slowly the movement lost its steam, and then came the pandemic, which played a role. Lebanon is something totally different. It's in Lebanon you have this system of communities, which is extremely powerful, extremely inefficient for governing, extremely efficient to stay in power. So they're not able to provide even the most basic things. They can't provide electricity, they can't provide work, they can't provide anything. At the same time, they're extremely difficult to overthrow. They're staying and people demonstrate, and then they get tired, and they demonstrate again, and they say, well, we're united, and whatever community we belong to, we are all united, we forget communities. But at one point, people are overwhelmed by the leaders of their communities, and they fall online, and so it's a very, very complicated situation, much more complicated probably than anywhere else.
Well, everyone agrees the countries in the Middle East, North Africa, in the Levant, face many challenges. They have their own very different failures, weaknesses. But I want to ask also about chances. What chances do you see that could come out from the region?
I think one should never lose hope. And I think the one positive lesson that remains from the what was called the Arab Spring 10 years ago is that sometimes something happens which is not expected, and it changes the whole reality. So I feel
Like
that
the
if
like our unexpected brothers.
yeah, exactly, like in my latest novel, yeah, something like that. At one point, all the very strict analysis one can make leads to there is no perspective, and then something happens, and all the analyses are thrown away because something emerged in the reality. So I hope I hope that at one point something will emerge in that part of the world and will change the reality, because what happened in my area of origin is extremely sad. It is an area that should have been one of the most developed. They have everything. They have natural resources. They have the people. You have somebody from that part of the world. He's doing nothing because the system is completely inefficient. And then that same person goes to a laboratory in the United States or in Germany or in France or in England, and he's a genius. And that's true in all kind of fields. There are people who are extraordinary, extraordinary everywhere. The problem is that there is a system that is completely uh, preventing them from playing any role. They're under a very, very, very heavy system. So maybe one day something will happen, and we begin again to see the possibilities of flourishing in that part of the world. I really hope.
Um, Mr. Maalouf, I have one last question for you, knowing that you're not very optimistic about the way that the world has taken. If you were to write a novel, an essay about the future of the Mediterranean, how would it be?
No, one of the problems in the Mediterranean, and especially in the area in which I was born, is that the most glorious moments are moments in the past. And there is this very disturbing feeling that the most beautiful moments in our history was 2,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or even in Lebanon even 50 years ago. And imagining the future, maybe at one point, through a kind of association with Europe, something could be built. Today, it seems very remote, a remote possibility. But it is still possible that at one point, a kind of great ensemble of countries from that part of the world, both Europe and the Mediterranean area, can find the power and the will to build something, an area of development, of knowledge. I think probably this is the most promising possibility, much more than a resurgence that comes only from the southern shores of the Mediterranean.
So let's together hope and work for this dream. Mr. Maalouf, I want to thank you very much for this very sincere and insightful conversation. And I hope very much that we can continue this dialogue sometime soon, maybe in Berlin.
Thank you very much. Thank you.